Hi everyone, it's been a while. What's new? I cut my hair. I have a new chair. It's rolly. Yeah, that's about it. Hi everyone, my name is Natalie DC and I'm a reader, writer, and artist here to talk about books with you. And art, and maybe a little writing. Haven't gotten to that yet, as you may have seen. My YouTube channel is still just a bunch of haphazardly posted book reviews, but we're gonna get there. School's almost over, finals week is next week. Pray for me. And then, yeah, I'll be posting way more. But right now I'm here to talk about all the books that I read in the month of March. They're all yellow, hence my sweater today. It is like the first week of May at the time of recording, so very late, so we're gonna try to catch up. But yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So I read a total of 9 yellow books in the month of March, so those are the ones that I'll be going over in this video. So the first yellow book that I read in the month of March is A Tiny Upward Shove by Melissa Chadburn. This was an ARC gifted to me by NetGalley, so thank you NetGalley for that. This is a story about a young woman named Marina Salas. It takes place on the day of her death, where she is brutally murdered by this man that I believe rapes her. It's very violent and tragic, but her life does not end the moment that she dies. Rather, she is possessed by an Aswang spirit. This book goes through her life leading up to this day, and it's kind of her reflecting back on her life and like the people that were involved in her life and kind of getting in their heads and seeing what was going on at that time. It explores race, rape culture, and just this girl's upbringing in America as she was brought up in I believe the foster system. So yeah, a lot of heavy topics covered in this novel, but I thought it was all done beautifully. The cover is beautiful. The title, A Tiny Upward Shove, once you read the story you will see the meaning of that title, and it is just wonderfully incorporated. And it's also really sad, so I wouldn't recommend it for people who don't want to read heavy things, but if you're in the mood for that, I would definitely recommend this. It was a really wonderful and insightful read. Only thing that I did not like was the constant POV changes. I thought they were very sudden, and I didn't really understand why a lot of them were brought up. Like, for example, there is a perspective of the rapist and the rapist family and how he was brought up and stuff, so if you don't really care to see that kind of perspective, which I understand why you wouldn't, then I would not recommend this. But yeah, that is a portion of the story which I did not care for. But other than that, this was a beautifully written story. Melissa Chadburn is gorgeous in her writing. It reminds me a lot of Akweke and Meze's writing, which, you know, I love their writing, and any writing that reminds me of that is good in my book. So yeah, that was the first book that I read. I gave it 4.5 stars, and yeah, I couldn't recommend it more. So the next book that I read in the month of March is She Who Became the Sun, the first book in the Radiant Emperor series by Shelley Parker Chan. I've been wanting to get my hands on the series for a while, so I finally picked this up for this challenge, and I really liked it. It's marketed as Mulan meets The Song of Achilles. I've not read The Song of Achilles, so that didn't really mean much to me, but Mulan, I was on that. So this book is basically about this girl who grows up alongside her brother in 1345 ancient China. While her brother's destiny is greatness, he ends up dying in her small town's famine. So because she strives for greatness herself, she takes the identity of her brother and grows up becoming eventually a monk in order to escape the famine of her town. And she eventually grows up to fight in the war to achieve greatness. I really enjoyed this novel. It did take me quite a long time to get through, just because it is a very thick and rich novel, very world building heavy, and I thought the world building could have been done better, simply, or maybe it's just my tiny brain, but like, I could not follow a lot of this, especially at the beginning. I was very confused by what was going on. I was having trouble following especially the political side of the world building. There were a lot of characters, so that also made it kind of difficult to follow, but eventually I kind of got the hang of the writing style and the world that this book was set in, and I eventually understood kind of the differing sides of the war, and I was able to follow along with the story. So yeah, it does take a bit of time to get into, especially if you are not used to reading historical fiction or fantasy, especially fantasy. So it did take me quite a long time to get into, but once I was in, and I really enjoyed it. And it is gay, which I always love. But yeah, I'll definitely be picking up the sequel to this book. Yeah, I would highly recommend it. And I gave this book 3.75 stars. Can I read anything happy is the question. The answer is no. So the next yellow book that I read in the month of March is The Beauty of Your Face by Sahar Mustafah. This is a book about a woman named Afaf Rahman, the daughter of 2 Palestinian immigrants, as she reflects back on her life during the suspenseful moments in which a school shooter enters the Muslim girls' school that she is principal of and shoots up the place. And it's kind of, the story takes place in those moments where she's hiding from the shooter and reflecting back on her life up until that point. Yeah, kind of similar to Tiny Upward Shove in that it takes place in a small window of time in which the main character reflects back on their life. It is also similar in its beautiful prose and the way in which the author is able to engage the reader in Afaf Rahman's story. The reader is able to feel like as if they are a part of Afaf's often dysfunctional family. I especially related hard to the author's description of the factions that sprung up inside of Afaf's family and kind of those sides that family members can take against one another. I thought that was really well incorporated into the story, so yeah, I really related to that. I also loved the way in which we are taken back to the present periodically, so the reader is still able to have a connection to the present as they're kind of taken through Afaf's story. The only reason I did not give this book a perfect 5 stars was the reason that we are actually at one point, or I think at a few points actually, we're taken back to the present into the school shooter's perspective, which I did not enjoy. It left a bad taste in my mouth. Like we're going through this woman's like heart-wrenching journey as she grows up in America, and then we just go into this, frankly, Hicks perspective as he kind of reflects back on the decisions that led up to him shooting up the school. I don't know, it just left a bad taste in my mouth. It wasn't something I wanted to read, and while I know that this story's main core theme was forgiveness, the way this was handled, I didn't really care for, but that's just my opinion. If you don't mind that kind of storytelling, I would really recommend this, and I would recommend it anyway. I gave The Beauty of Your Face 4 stars. So, on to the next one. So the next yellow book that I read in the month of March is What Would Frida Do? A Guide to Living Boldly by Arianna Davis. I was initially intrigued by the premise of this book, combining a biography of Frida Kahlo's life, whom I really admire and respect as an artist, with kind of a self-help narrative to help the average artist or even just creative person get motivated in their life. So I was initially drawn to this book because of that premise, but unfortunately the book as it went on became very tedious and exhausting to read simply by how repetitive it was in the trivia beats of Frida Kahlo's life, like how she was in an accident that impacted her for the rest of her life, how she called America Gringo Land, which albeit is funny, but not after you've read it for like the 15th time in like a matter of 2 chapters. Like it just wasn't feasible for me to just keep reading the same information over and over again, and I barely finished this because of how exhausting it was to read. Instead, I would have liked to see maybe a portion of this book dedicated to Frida Kahlo's biography, maybe a portion of this book dedicated to advice we can glean from Frida Kahlo's life, and then maybe a portion of this book dedicated to the art that Frida Kahlo made during her life, because we don't get any visuals during, like, in the middle of the book. And as someone who's only familiar with like a handful of Frida Kahlo's work, it just wasn't really feasible for me to like envision the pieces as the author's describing them. Like I would have liked to see them in the book. That could have filled page space instead of just repeating the same information over and over again. Yeah, well, I initially thought I was really gonna like this, and it ended up being just a meager 3 stars for me. But if this sounds like something that you would want to read, by all means, read it and tell me what you think in the comments down below. On to the next book. So speaking of underwhelming, highly anticipated reads, the next book that I read in the month of March is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. Now, if you're into the booktube community, you know that this was a very huge success amongst readers. It seems like everyone on Goodreads like loves this book. Unfortunately, I did not like it. This book follows 17-year-old Enchanted as she wakes up in a hotel room covered in the blood of her idol and crush, 26-year-old musician Corey Field. And as the police are banging down on her door, she's kind of reflecting back on what led her to this moment. So again, a very similar narrative beats to the previous books that I've mentioned. But despite this book being marketed as like a super serious and suspenseful mystery thriller, it ended up reading like a YA Twilight-esque creepy love story between 17-year-old Enchanted and 26-year-old Corey Fields guy that she meets at a audition. I wouldn't have minded this kind of marketing clickbait as it is, but unfortunately the book just had really nothing going for it. Please don't kill me, but like the writing was really over the top and exaggerated and very cringy at times. It read like a middle schooler was writing it instead of it being kind of the inner voice of this like 17-year-old mature girl. We'll get to that later. I hated the book for that. It was oddly fast-paced. It went from one day Enchanted is just going to school like a normal girl, the next day she's like traveling around the world with this guy that she hardly knows. It's very like sudden. I don't think we had like a proper build-up to that plot change. The other thing that bothered me was that grown portion of the story. Well, I'm guessing this was titled Grown, and the irony of this is that Enchanted is seen as grown and mature by the eyes of like her peers and her family. She's actually not, and she's kind of hypersexualized by everyone around her because she's a black woman. So that makes sense, but like it just did not work because she makes such costly mistakes. She doesn't see the red flags that everyone around her sees. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's not like a really good balance. If everyone couldn't see that this Corey Fields guy was obviously like a sleazeball, then like I would understand her not being able to see that either. But as it is, many of the people around her thought that he was creepy, you shouldn't be with him, and yet she went with him anyway. So it was kind of like a Bella Swan moment. Hello, my battery died, so I've been talking way too long. And I brought a blanket because it is rainy and disgusting and freezing here where I live. So those are the updates. But yeah, I was talking about Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. So the second reason I did not really like it. So we got bad writing, the theme doesn't really make sense, at least to me. And spoilers if you haven't read this book yet and you're planning on reading it, but there is a point towards the end of the book where it's hinted at to the reader that Enchanted's best friend, Gab, who she talks about all the time in the book, is not real. She does not exist. She's a figment of Enchanted's imagination, and she's brought into like a psychologist's office, and the psychologist is just like, yeah, you're insane. I've been imagining this Gab girl for like months and months. And like I was scared because years ago I had read a book that had this exact same trope where the mentally ill are like depicted as crazy and they're like imagining people. And it's like such a terrible, harmful trope. So yeah, I thought that's where this book was going. Now we do eventually find out that this was like some weird, complicated, I don't even know, ploy from her best friend Gab to like go undercover and like figure out who killed Corey Fields and kind of clear Enchanted's name. So that was kind of her idea, to kind of just pretend she never existed. So luckily the trope didn't come into fruition, but I still left a bad taste in my mouth. And then yeah, there's just other smaller things that really didn't sit well with me, like how willing the Enchanted's parents were to let her like gallivant across the country with this like complete stranger, mid-20s man, just running around the country with their like teenage daughter. Did not make sense to me. And then just like the preachy, cringy tone that the book takes on at the end with the whole like women are in danger, men suck. I don't know, like it just did not come together well for me. If some of you have read this book and you really like it, please let me know down in the comments like what you thought of my critiques. Like I said, I might just be misunderstanding some things, or some things are just not really relating to me, which is completely possible, but some things I just didn't really appreciate or understand with this book. So I sadly gave it 2 stars. I really wanted to like this book, especially with the cover too. It's like gorgeous. I thought it was gonna be amazing, but sadly I did not. So the next book that I read in the month of March is All Our Worst Ideas by Vicky. So this book is kind of like a complete 180 from the previous book, as it's very light and wholesome and fluffy, and it's just a cute contemporary YA romance between these two teenagers. One, Amy, who thinks she has her life all figured out, she wants to get into this great school, become valedictorian, like that's her entire goal throughout the book. And then the love interest, Oliver, who works at a music record store and doesn't really know what to do with his life. He's 19, doesn't know if he wants to go to college, and yeah, he's overall just clueless about what he wants for his future. So these two characters, they meet at the music record store. Amy's looking for a job, and yeah, they become co-workers, they become friends, and then they fall in love. It's really cute. I gave this book 3.75 stars. I really enjoyed it just for its relatable depiction of teenagehood and adolescence and just trying to figure out what you want to do with your life in the future. Yeah, I love seeing these two like totally different perspectives of life for these two people like come together into this like adorable romance. I don't know, I thought it was really cute. And then the whole like aspect of Oliver really being into music and them sending each other like playlists and stuff, like I thought it was really wholesome. So this sounds like a book that you'd be interested in checking out. Like I definitely recommend it because it's super cute. But yeah, I thought it was a wholesome read. So the next book that I read was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I hope I'm pronouncing their name right. This is a book that was translated from its original Japanese. It is about a 36-year-old woman living in Tokyo. It is about this woman's kind of fixation on her monotonous life. Basically, she has been a worker of this like supermarket. She's been a worker there for years, and her family is kind of looking for her to, you know, settle down, have a family, but she's just content working at this convenience store, just managing it, like making sure everything's perfect for the customers. Like she's very obsessed with like everything being perfect at the store. It's kind of about her trying to just live her life and just do what she wants to do, and then like the outside pressures of people wanting her to kind of conform to society, and it's kind of a commentary on that. I was under the impression this would be a dark comedy. I'm not sure if Goodreads or anything else like markets it as like a kind of a dark comedy, but I was expecting it to be that, and I also thought it would be about her struggling against hustle culture, but it's actually sort of the opposite, where her family wants her to settle down and she's the one who wants to keep hustling and keep working. So I very much had a different idea of what this book would be about before picking this up, hence why my experience reading didn't go as expected, because I thought this was going to be a funny book. I was kind of taken aback by the very depressing tone that it took on, especially towards the end when, spoilers, the main character decides to stay at the convenience store working. The book makes the reader think that, at least made me think, that the main character needs to suppress and hide her true personality and just mimic what others are doing in order to be perceived as normal in society. Many people on Goodreads have like hypothesized that maybe the author meant to code this character as sort of autistic or on the spectrum. I can't really touch on that, but in order to fit in, you need to like copy what others are doing. The main character did do that, and because the story ended with her just sticking with that and not really learning about trying to like just be herself, she doesn't even know who she is. She just copies what other people are doing and what they think and what they like. Like, it's like she has no personality at all, which I wouldn't mind for a story, but when the story ends with the character literally staying the same throughout the entire thing, in which they have no personality and are just copying what other people are doing throughout the entire book, it just became a lot, and like not in a good way. So yeah, for that reason, I gave this book 3.25 stars for the fact that it kind of went against my expectations, and it ended up being a pretty depressing and kind of like sad read about this woman who just feels she needs to like hide everything about herself in order to be perceived as normal, which I suppose is reality. Of course, we do live in a society, but I don't know, I would have liked some semblance of hope at the end of this very short novella. But I'd like to hear your thoughts if you've read this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So we are down to the last two books. The next book that I read is Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi. I loved this book so much. The writing was amazing. I said in my Goodreads review that every time I read a sentence of Jane's, the main character's narration, it felt like an itch was being scratched in my brain. And it's true. The writing was incredible. This book follows two sisters. Jane is the main character. She is the younger sister. She doesn't really have her life together. She's in her mid-20s and she's kind of just stumbling through life, living in New York City, living in the shadow of her older sister June, who was the overachiever of the family and was always given the most attention by her family. The two sisters, they're estranged at the beginning of the book, but as the book goes on, June approaches Jane and tells her that she has ovarian cancer, and so the two start living with each other and interacting more with each other as Jane tries to support June through this traumatic experience, and June starts to learn more about and empathize more with Jane, whom she never really understood. Despite not being the younger sister myself in my family, I did relate a lot to Jane and her feelings of just never being good enough. So I think that's what made me really love this book so much and the characters so much. I thought the family dynamics were really relatable. I love seeing June and Jane live. I love seeing like their domestic scenes together. There was a big portion of the book dedicated to Jane's relationship with her ex-boyfriend, who's like really shitty and like a douchebag. I didn't really care for that. It didn't really interest me. I did like seeing Jane's struggle with an eating disorder and kind of her mental health as well. I thought that was a really interesting and poignant aspect of the book. Yeah, like I thought this was just a really incredible story, and like the ending where the family comes together to like support each other and support June as she goes into surgery, like it was really heartfelt and it made me feel some type of way. So yeah, I gave this book 4.75 stars. Like I said, I wish we had seen kind of more domestic scenes and less of Jane's kind of relationship drama, but other than that, like I really enjoyed this book, and I'm willing to check out much more of Mary H.K. Choi's works in the future. This one is definitely a favorite from this month, and I would totally recommend it. So the last yellow book that I read is No One Belongs Here More Than You by Miranda July. Now, I am quite a big fan of Miranda July's works. I've so far watched her movies Billionaire and Me and You and Everyone We Know. I'm kind of a film connoisseur, if you will. No, I'm not. I just like watching movies. But yes, I've seen two of her works. She is a director and screenwriter, and I now have read her collection of short stories. Since it is an all yellow book, quite literally, I thought it would be perfect for this month's challenge. This was just a collection of short stories, fictional. They're all about different protagonists kind of dealing with the mundanity of life, and it says something about the human condition. I didn't really get most of it, as you can see. Like a lot of them were trying to be deep and it didn't really work for me, so many of them I didn't really care for. There was one story called The Boy from Lam Kien. That was my favorite out of the collection. I thought it was really poignant, and the writing style was super cool. I love Miranda July's writing. I think it's just so like quirky and not in a bad way. I like this book well enough. Like I said, some stories connected with me, some others didn't. I think this book would only be interesting to people who are familiar with Miranda July and want to read more of her stuff. If you don't know who Miranda July is, or you're not familiar with her, I don't know if this would interest you much, because without knowing about her wackiness of her stories and being familiar with that, I don't know if this would be your thing. But who am I to say? Check it out if you want to, but yeah, I gave this book 3.25 stars. I thought it was a pretty decent read, so yeah. So those are all the yellow books. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I am filming this in May, so I already read all the books that I read for April. April is gonna be green. I can't show you the stack of books that I read because I already read them, but here's a picture of all the books that at least I hope to read in the month of April. And yeah, the next video you'll be seeing will be me just talking about those green books. So yeah, a little bit of a different vibe today, but I hope you guys enjoyed it nonetheless. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up, comment down below your thoughts, and subscribe for more content. And if you're interested in poetry, I recommend checking out my book of poetry, Blue Pearl, available on Bottle Cap Press. You can find it in the description box below. But yeah, guys, that's everything. So have a great day, week, month, whatever you're feeling, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.